Today, the Nakba is manifested in the taking away of IDs and residency rights of tens of thousands of people.
Welcome to the first Middle East Peace Raps. This afternoon, Rap News is proud of this tremendous chance to prove the peace-filled art of rap could chart the best roadmap to start anew.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the internet at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. In March, Yale's Council on Middle East Studies brought Lia Tarachansky to show her film On the Side of the Road. Several things stand out about Lia Tarachansky. One, she was born in the Soviet Union, and the other, she grew up on an Israeli settlement. But if you think she's a stereotypical right-winger, you'd be very wrong. The day after she spoke at Yale, she spoke at the New Haven Library, and we filmed much of her talk. We start, though, with an upcoming protest. At the end of April, there'll be a conference and hopefully massive march in New York City against nuclear weapons. In past shows, we've talked about the dangers of nuclear war, and these dangers never went away, and now they've increased because of Obama's new multi-trillion-dollar nuke program. Video courtesy of peaceandplanet.org.
The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
80,000 people died within the hour.
For nearly 70 years, wave after wave of committed people have worked to abolish nuclear weapons and create a peaceful, just, and sustainable world. Each generation has found its voice and moved us closer to that goal. Now, it's our turn. Join us for Peace and Planet.
Like a meteorite, satellite laser beam with you in their sights, and with the Patriot Act, they took all your rights. Don't ever doubt the power of just one mind.
Lia Tarachansky is a video journalist for The Real News. The film that she showed at Yale centered on two veterans of the Israeli War of 1948, veterans who have come to understand the part they played in the brutal ethnic cleansing of that year.
Sure. So for those of you who were not there last night, I'm an Israeli Russian. So I was born in the Soviet Union, but I grew up in Israel. And I'm a journalist. And I've made a film called On the Side of the Road. And it's a film that basically follows two Israeli veterans of the 1948 war as they struggle with their own processes of going through confronting the denial and speaking about the atrocities they've committed in the 48 war as a representation of the mass sort of silence that we have in Israel, because 48 is still the biggest taboo. Talking about what happened in 47, 48, 49, and how 2/3 of the Palestinians became refugees is still, despite a lot of information that came out, a big taboo. Now, in Israel in the 80s, 30 years after 1948, in 1978, the archives that were holding a lot of the documents about 48, the Israeli Zionist archives, the British Royal Archives, and the UN archives opened. And so for the first time, we had historians go into these archives and start digging through government materials about 48. And the reason for why I'm using the word for the first time is because despite the fact that these were the children of the people who did the things in 48, the folks who personally participated in 48 largely didn't talk about it. It was something that was almost erased from the Israeli, let's call it, dominant discourse. So they go into the archives and they quote unquote discover that these Arabs sitting in refugee camps are actually Palestinians, and how did they become refugees in refugee camps and so on. And they become what's known in Israel as the new historians. Some people also call them the first historians or the revisionist historians, because up until that point, all of the history of Israel, or all the history of Israel for the Hebrew-speaking Israeli audience was nationalistic government history, which is very common of new states. They have to tell a story. So they dig those things up, and by the end of the 80s, in 1987, an Israeli historian, journalist called Simcha Flapan, takes the major things that they point out and constructs a summary of it. And the book is called The Birth of Israel, Myths and Realities, and he basically separates Israel's national narrative into 7 myths, and then proves, using journalistic and historical materials, how much of that is myth. So the first one would be something like that the Palestinians rejected partition and started the war. The second one is that the Jewish people accepted partition and war was forced on them. The third and most famous one in Israel is that the Palestinians left of their own accord because they didn't love the land enough, or because they were told to leave by their leaders and so on. And already in 1987, much of this mythology is kind of busted by Simcha Flapan. So originally, after reading the materials of the new historians and reading Simcha Flapan's book, I wanted to make a journalistic film. And the film would have been called 7 Deadly Myths. Thankfully, we changed the name to something better. And it's no longer a journalistic film. It's a film about that distance between the Israeli conversation and the Palestinian conversation about our history. And particularly, the way I phrased it yesterday is that when Palestinians are talking, they tend to be talking about the Nakba. The Nakba being, of course, the Arabic word for catastrophe, and refers to what happened in 47, 48, 49, and until today. But particularly, it implies the ethnic cleansing and expulsion. So in 48, 49, these dots in red were erased from the map, and Palestine, as a national movement, as a people's, was erased from the Israeli consciousness, let's say. Today, the Nakba is manifested in the taking away of IDs and residency rights of tens of thousands of people. Every policy that intends to increase Israel's control over maximum land with minimum non-Jewish people on it. So, for example, after the summer war this July and August, the Minister of Interior got together with the cabinet, and I think it was the first or the second meeting, and he announced in this joyous sort of celebratory victor kind of narrative that they now have statistics that tens of thousands of Palestinians are leaving the Gaza Strip as the biggest victory of the war. So the intention to have as many Palestinians leave as possible is still a part of the Israeli policy, and is part of what they call making their life miserable. And it doesn't apply just to Palestinians. It also applies to the Bedouin. It also applies to African refugees who are not Jewish. Anyone who is not a Jewish person is driven in one way or another, either by force or by administrative practices, out of this country. And the reason for that, of course, is because you cannot have a Jewish state if the majority of the people are not Jewish. And the fight to maintain that majority is a constant juggling struggle between how many babies you count, how many babies are born, what birth rates, and so on. And maybe later I'll show you a little clip which is particularly disturbing in that sense. So when I realized that when the Palestinians are talking about our shared history, they are talking about this. They are talking about ethnic cleansing. They're talking about living under military occupation. They're talking about living in exile, about never having stability and constantly being under threat. And when the Israelis and Jews, when we were talking about the Holocaust. We were talking about anti-Semitism and terrorism. And so the film became something that is not so much about what happened in 48, but what is in the distance between these two conversations. And why is it that it's so difficult in Israel to talk about 1948? And in fact, every time that we tried to do that in the public sphere, we were met with a lot of outrage and a lot of violence. And that's something that's also documented in the film. I will. So the question was that this gentleman heard that there were three versions of the history, one that the Palestinians left of their own accord, one that they were driven out, and a third one. So I don't know what you are referring to. I haven't heard three narratives of the history, but I will tell you that I don't so much believe that in the postmodernist idea that there's no objective truth. I think that there are actual facts of things that happened, and then there's a million interpretations of what happened. So objectively, let's say, we know that there were more than 100 armed expulsions of Palestinian villages, and there was a whole campaign of psychological warfare. So for example, the biggest wave of dispossession happened after the Deir Yassin massacre in April 1948, when about 100 civilians were massacred by Jewish forces in a village just outside of Jerusalem. The brutality of the massacre was such that rumors of it sent hundreds of thousands of people on foot to flee the country. So some of the expulsions were armed expulsions. Some of the expulsions were the people left of their own accord because they knew what was coming. And as Eitan in the film says, you don't need to hold a gun up to every single civilian to call it an expulsion. If you do a few brutal acts and the village next door leaves, it's because of the war. It's because of the expulsions. And of course, the biggest part of the Nakba is the not letting the refugees return, shutting the door behind them and saying, you're not really refugees, you're not really a people, you're not really a nation, and so you have no right to return to your lands and to your houses. So yesterday I was talking about different layers of collective denial, because the film is dedicated to Stanley Cohen, who is a South African and Israeli sociologist and what's called a psychohistorian. And he basically analyzes the way in which collective denial works in societies. Now, having been born as a white, privileged Jewish person in apartheid South Africa, at the age of 9, he has this incredible revelation, which most folks who grow up in privilege don't really have until they're adults, if they have it at all. So at the age of 9, he's sitting inside his house, in this sort of rich kind of house in South Africa, and he's looking it was the winter, and he's looking outside during the night. And his family was eating dinner at the time, and he documents this thought that runs through his head, where he's sitting inside the house and he's thinking to himself, how come outside the house this guard is sitting in the cold, guarding our house, and he's black, and everyone who works for us is black, but us and all our friends are white? How come no one seems to notice that? What's up with that? So at the age of 9, he has this sort of understanding of basic race relations and privilege in apartheid South Africa, and ends up growing up as a dedicated anti-apartheid activist, and studies sociology to try to understand what goes on in the minds of whole collectives of people, whole cultures, whole societies, when they look at something and they don't see what's right in front of them. He ends up moving to Israel for 12 years, and he works for B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization that documents human rights violations. B'Tselem means in the image of. It refers to Genesis. So this organization, which tries to basically say we should be striving to be in the image of the divine, not trying to not striving to be in the image of a repressive regime. So what he ends up doing with them is he documents torture. And specifically, in Jerusalem, in the heart of downtown Jerusalem, right where the tourist section is, there's one of the biggest prisons in Israel. It's called Moscovia in Arabic, or the Russian compound in English. And this prison is very, very notorious for, up until 2000, being the place where a lot of torture took place. In 2000, the Israeli Supreme Court illegalized open torture as such, and now Israel implements a whole wide range of torture-like tools, such as stress positions and all the stuff that your army also uses in places like, used to use in Abu Ghraib and is probably using in Guantanamo. So this prison is located in downtown Jerusalem. So every Thursday, every Friday, when youth about 20, 21 go out, they go out on this main street called Jaffa Street. They get hammered, and they go singing, and they go dancing, and it's a big, basically a street of debauchery every Thursday and Friday. And they're walking past this prison, where 4 floors under the ground are cells of people that are getting tortured, as he's writing this. And he's saying, and he knows that Israelis know that this is what's going on, because of course he's in charge of publishing these reports and getting them into the Israeli press. So you can no longer say, I don't know. And he ends up going to England and founding this field of study called collective denial. And thanks to him, we now have the basis for this whole field, which has since been flourishing and growing. Unfortunately, he died 2 years ago. So the Russian Jews in Israel are by and large blamed for Israel's turn to the right. They are often stereotyped as having come from a dictatorial authoritarian country and having brought those principles with them, and so on. But I think that this is very misleading, because the Russian Jews in Israel, of course, they are not the ones who killed Yitzhak Rabin. They are not the ones who expelled the 500 plus villages and renamed and demolished them. They are not the ones who did the majority of the work. But they are a nice, convenient scapegoat, because, of course, the Russian rhetoric, the Russian political rhetoric, is a rhetoric of I would call it brutality. You have to do what you got to do. The means justify the ends. And so there's a big stereotype. And, of course, the first Russian politician to really gain popularity, his name is Avigdor Lieberman. He's from Moldova, and he embodies the farthest right extremist version of this rhetoric. Now, I don't think he represents the majority of Russian Jews, but he speaks in the very sort of, I'm a strong leader, we need strong leaders, this is the Middle East, this is barbaric land, and we have to be strong, and this is the only way that we will survive. And this is something that, in a way, appeals to many of the Russians who elected him into power, because they're basically seeing, well, this didn't work, and this didn't work. Maybe this will work. But I will say that the vast majority of Israelis, just like the vast majority of the Palestinians, just want this thing to end already.
More of her remarks next week. We show this editorial cartoon by Carlos Latouf as another catastrophe engulfs the Palestinians. This one in Syria, with ISIS taking over most of Yarmouk camp near Damascus. This comes after years of siege by Syrian Assad forces and their Palestinian collaborator militias. I spoke at length about this with Syrian Professor Yasser Munif of Emerson. Go to our website to hear the interview. One surprising prediction he makes is that ISIS probably won't fight Assad. The two forces actually rarely mix it up. Please take a look at our website, Archives on Syria, for more. And be one of 1,000 or more people who have seen our interview with Saudi dissident Ali Al-Ahmed about the attack on Yemen. The excuses for the attack beggar the imagination. The latest is that the Saudis are only protecting the two holy mosques from the Houthis. We are sometimes accused of being endlessly grim. So now we end with a rap satire on Palestine-Israel produced by an Australian site, Juice Rap News.
Good afternoon. Rap News is back online. Today we take on and analyze one of the most intractable, divisive, ongoing violent divides to happen in our time. The 60-year conflict going on betwixt Israel and Palestine. Is there a one-state, two-state, or no straight solution to this protracted fight? From Camp David to Madrid, Taba to Oslo, for decades back in time, all peace talks have devolved into violent rows, and roadmaps to peace have led nowhere but more war. Until now. Welcome to the first Middle East Peace Raps. This afternoon, Rap News is proud of this tremendous chance to prove the peace-filled art of rap could chart the best roadmap to start anew. So first up, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Shalom. Bibi been ready this whole time to engage the peace process with war crimes. Raw rhymes.
Alright, well, we'd like to bring the whole story to light. Please begin by telling us Israel's side. How did this war arise?
The fact is, my people have suffered awful tragedies, centuries of persecution, diaspora. We were slaughtered, massacred. In the Shoah, Hitler tried to have us wiped off the map, and thus we sought a safe harbor, a place to gather us. Some told us go to Argentina, others go to Uganda, but we said go fuck yourselves. And like Exodus, we came back to our biblical homeland, Eretz Israel, which the Lord handed us. And then in 1948 we declared the birth of the Jewish state.
Your people have indeed suffered massively, unimaginably, and should have sanctuary, not just in the Middle East, but wherever they happen to be. However, isn't the Holy Land holy also to Christians and Muslims? How can you claim that only Jews own the land and exclude them?
With the Six-Day War, we fulfilled our Zionist covenant, invaded Jerusalem, the West Bank, Golan and Gaza, taking all of it.
The occupied territories.
Then on the 7th day we rested, and when all the world's nations witnessed this great event, they
condemned it?
What?
It seems the UN issued Resolution 242,
Wait, wait.
calling on Israel to give back those territories and withdraw troops.
Hey, are you denying the legitimacy of the Jewish state?
I'm just trying to...
Anti-Semites!
Wait, what?
Everybody, this guy's a Nazi!
Okay, just let's relax.
Jew hater!
We've yet to ask the rival party. We now cross direct to Gaza to check the raps of a Palestinian spokesperson representing Hamas.
Salam! As you can see, we are ready to talk peace, but only within the 1967 borders will we recognize Israel and sign deals. Oh yeah? Recognize these. Kapow! Hamas? Now he looks more like hummus. What a mess.
Mr. Netanyahu, you killed him.
I guess. But it was in self-defense.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was. Yes. Check out the news coverage from the US. I'm Brian Washington. You're on MSNBS. Tonight's headlines: peace process shattered yet again by unprovoked attacks from Arab terrorists. Israel retaliates with airstrikes in self-defense. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, Palestinian suicide homes are ramming themselves into peaceful Israeli bulldozers. Israel is under threat, which is why, as shown on this map, its settlements have, steadily expanded. How can we end this injustice? To explain, we welcome John Kerry, Secretary of State. Great to be back, Bucky. And don't you stress a bit. American taxpayers have got Israel covered till Armageddon hits. No country gets more US foreign aid sent to it. $140 billion since the 70s, plus military weaponry. No conditions or strings with it. No conditions at all? Well, we would prefer it better if they could kindly stop using our money to build new illegal settlements. What did you say, you schmuck? Baby! Oh, no, I was just telling them. Just keep sending the money, schmickele. Yes, sir, we'll write the check. Wait, we're getting a call from some Jewish guy in Brooklyn. He's on the line with us. An American Jew? He's bound to be pro-Zionist. Let him speak.
Hello, MSNBS?
Yes, you're on the screen.
This is Norman Finkelstein, ringing in to state the truth in this case. Israel is a lunatic state. It's no excuse to steal Palestinian land because Jews suffered genocide at Hitler's hands.
A self-hating Jew. Everybody, this guy's an Ashkenazi.
Shut up, BB. And I also condemn American policy of funding the theft of Palestinian territory.
Okay, Funkelstein, we get the gist of all this. Now where were we? Financing war crime. That's a straight fact. Well done, America. Thank AIPAC. They got us by the taint sack, so we have to wave that Star of David flag. But it's worth paying cash to have Israel's back. That's true. They're the only nation in the Muslim backwoods that shares our American values. Give us some examples. We both love trampling international law. Constantly. We're both nuclear states and democracies with terrorist foreign policies. And obviously, both America and Israel were built by occupying territories of native peoples. We're both settler colonies. Awesome. Publicity time. Keep your eyes on the screen.
Hey, I'm Scarlett Johansson, and my real job is promoting illegal occupations. It's easy. You start by taking other people's land and water, send in Zionist settlers, pushed the natives out of their homes, causing bloodshed. And look, settlers' dream, better for Israel and all of us.
Scarjo looks delicious, and what's more, it reminds me of our very own sponsor, Redskin Genocider, flavor of the American nation, bloody good, tasteful.
So, Israel is a settler colony, like Canada, America, and Australia! Our colonial assessor is in the area. Does Israel pass the test, Kenovka? Kenovka? Yeah! I'm in Jerusalem, and what's going on over there? I'm celebrating the day of Israel's birth, Yom Hetzmaut, which roughly translates to Australia Day. And wow, it's like back home, Barbies, flags, beers. So in solidarity, I got the end of me knob chopped off. It's patriotic, apparently. What do Palestinians make of this day? I don't know, eh? Perhaps you should ask them. Okay, I'll ask the natives. Wait, hello, can you hear me?
Salam!
Hey, how do you celebrate this wonderful day?
We natives participate with smiling face in this party, mate. Just like your aboriginal people on Invasion Day. And I was cast out from the lands of my mom and my father. Now I dance as an outcast to the bombs over Gaza.
بينادوا يوم الاستقلال احنا بننادي النكبة.
And we sing Israel where independence is our nakba.
Sounds great. I love a party with a snack bar.
Not a snack bar, Crocodile Dundee. Nakba. It means a catastrophe.
Anti-Semitic.
It's far from truth. We are far from home. Zionism is far from Jews. How can I explain it to you? We lost our rights that day.
And our barbecues.
No Barbies. That's a tragedy. How can we help yous?
BDS يعني مقاطعة. هاي الطريقة اللي بيستجم في تل أبيب زي اللي استجم في جنوب أفريقيا. ساعدنا نوقف جنون المستوطن. ساعدنا نبني دولة فيها شوية منطق. مش دولة اليهود بل دولة لليهود،
للمسيحية، للمسلمين،
ليوسي، لعبود، لجيريس
ولميل جيبسون.
What the fuck شو خص ميل جيبسون؟
Well, it seems that despite the use of rap and rhyme, we failed to seal a real peace deal between Israel and Palestine. Nevertheless, I hope we've expanded our minds and are prepared to share some final thoughts before we wrap for the night. This might seem like some battle entwining other people in another time, but in fact it mirrors back our own greatest challenge, to live side by side, no matter race, flags, or which invisible man we pray to in the sky. And that is why there'll be peace nowhere until there's peace in Palestine. The wall is over, if we wanted, to borrow Lenin's line. It was pressure from outside that ended the crime of apartheid, that turned terrorists into winners of the Peace Prize. The question is, can we learn history's lessons and apply them in our time? When we analyze our direction, it's clear where the answers lie. Does any state hold the power to change the tide? Or is the one safe solution for us to unify rather than divide? Not just in the Middle East, but globally, far and wide. Good night.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.